You're listening to PodCatalyst, the official podcast of IABC, where communicators from around the world tell their stories. Let's get started with today's episode. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is Becca Chambers, and I really enjoyed this conversation. We touch on a little bit of everything here. Becca has a fascinating career path that eventually led her to the C-suite as Chief Communications Officer. So we touch on that as well as her thoughts on the value of communicators in the C-suite. We also spent a good part of the conversation around neurodiversity in the workplace. This was really eye-opening to me, and Becca has a lot to share that will hopefully help you think differently about the topic as well. Or if you're someone who is neurodivergent, feel affirmed in what she has to share. Becca and I were first connected on LinkedIn. I've really enjoyed following her, getting to know her on that platform, so I asked her a little bit about how she's built her brand there as well. Again, I hope you enjoy the episode, and let's get started with the show.
Hi, my name is Becca Chambers. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at ControlUp, a digital employee experience management company. And I think communication creates connection, understanding, and trust, which is the foundation for everything we do in business and in life, for that matter.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Kristen Frankevich, your host for today. Thanks for tuning in. And Becca, thanks for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
So before we get started, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about your career journey. Can you tell us how you got to that role of Chief Communications Officer?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here amongst fellow communications people. It's a good audience. So talking about communications things is one of my favorites. So I'll spare everyone the details on how I got into communications because there is an interesting near-death experience, but I've talked about it on other podcasts. You can go look it up. That's what got me interested in the path of communications. But the short version is I started in sports PR actually 20 years ago, supporting traveling with the UFC, NFL, WNBA. It was a pretty cool job. But it was also a special kind of grind that I knew I didn't want to do forever. So after I went back to grad school, got to figure out what I want to do. I was clear on one thing, and that was that I love brand, all things brand strategy, brand management, brand design. So I taught myself graphic design and started doing odd jobs for friends and family, people who needed just brand work or design work. And then I finished grad school in the middle of a recession. So living in Los Angeles, trying to find a job, there were no jobs to be found. I managed to land an interview in the Bay Area with a company called McAfee, a cybersecurity company. And they asked me to create a PowerPoint presentation about WikiLeaks. I don't know if people remember WikiLeaks, but I used my newfound, well, maybe it's dating me too. Some people are
not too much,
too young for that.
Not too much.
But I used my newfound graphic design skills and the communication skills that I had. I was a communications major in undergrad to impress this hiring manager. And I landed my first role as an executive communications manager at McAfee. And what's interesting is that role was a total surprise to me. I literally didn't even know that role existed. I had never heard of an executive communications manager before I landed the role. And I'm really glad that I did because it was scary to jump into something totally unknown. But it was the start of this amazing journey to where I am now. I became this behind the scenes voice for the C-suite at this, large company. I traveled with them. I got to sit in meetings that I would normally never get to as a 20-something early in my career. It was really formative. Plus, I learned a lot of the, do's and don'ts about the industry, right? I learned some of the hard things about being a woman in tech. And I definitely learned more in that role than if I had just been, stuck in an office all day or, doing kind of traditional, I don't know what traditional comms work is, but if I was doing things just sitting behind my computer, I got to see how all of these pieces came together and how that impacted kind of a broader corporate strategy. Frankly, I was going to say communication strategy, but really it's the whole corporate strategy. And that McAfee job sent me on what's been a 15-year journey in enterprise tech And what's probably most interesting is that I've worn almost every single communications hat. So I started at the PR agency. I spent years in exec comms and then analyst relations. I stood up new AR, internal comms, social media, content programs at multiple companies. And then I've been super lucky that over the course of the past decade or so, I've been at the helm of a bunch of rebranding activities, which is my most favorite thing to do. And like I said, coming out of grad school, I was very clear on I love brand. So it's very gratifying and exciting. And because my career path has been a lot of building and scaling up and figuring things out, I've had my hands in kind of everything from highest level strategy while reporting to CEOs down to kind of nitty gritty details that most people wouldn't even think about or know it's happening, right? Like things that comms people are doing behind the scenes. So that is how I got to where I am today.
That is a fascinating journey. And I think what's really cool is how you've been able to explore so many different facets that communications touches, right? And to your point, just scaled up the whole way along, right?
Well, and what's interesting is I think most people in my role or in communications leadership roles come from the PR agency background. And even though I did start in a PR agency, I actually don't consider myself coming from a PR background because sports PR is such a different ballgame than tech PR. And so I really don't have that tech PR agency experience, which for most is a prerequisite to have the role that I have. And I don't, but I think it gives me a different, like I come at this from a different lens maybe. And in some ways, I think the being different is what has helped me be successful in my career. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I know outside of communications, kind of like outside looking in some circles, there's a perception that communications can sit within marketing, but not necessarily in that executive function. Obviously, your career alone is proof against that. So I know you've also spent a good part of your career advocating for comms in the C-suite. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And why? What are the benefits?
yeah, so this is for some reason always a controversial topic. And I have sat within marketing, I've sat outside of marketing, I've been a peer to marketing, I've been in all of the different scenarios, and everyone has an opinion about where comms should sit. And rarely is anyone listening to the comms people about where comms should sit. But,
Right.
my firm belief is that in every company, large and small, doesn't matter, if you have a C-suite, you should have a head of communications that sits on your leadership team beside your head of finance, beside your head of sales, beside your head of marketing, HR, legal, etc. And it's actually not that outlandish. I read an Axios article, I think late 2023. 44% of communications leaders report to the head of marketing, but 41% report to the CEO. That's pretty interesting. That's a pretty big number. So there's obviously a shift, and people are recognizing that comms isn't just marketing and therefore shouldn't sit within the marketing umbrella. I think that's probably more true in certain industries. I think education is a good one. Healthcare is a good one. Usually comms reports directly to the CEO. In tech, I think it's much more common for comms to sit within marketing. So to answer your original question about why comms and marketing should be peers rather than having comms as part of the marketing umbrella, the CMO and the marketing organization in general should be laser focused on one audience, the customer. Their world revolves around the customer, the needs of the customer, the wants of the customer, the personas, their pain points, their use cases, desires, right?
Yeah.
Buying behaviors, all of the things. Communication teams are not focused on one audience. In fact, good communications leaders and teams are responsible for all of the company's constituents, inside and outside. That means customers, but it also means employees, investors, governments, other companies and organizations, potential employees, right? Like companies you might want to partner with. Like comms might not be responsible for quota, but we have our hands in literally every part of the business. So this notion that comms is a function of marketing, that we're here to sell the product only, I think minimizes what comms can do. And when it sits under the marketing umbrella, often makes it hard for comms to be able to function in the way that they need to. But, again, contentious opinion.
Well, and I think what you're getting at is that if you want to communicate effectively, you need the right people in the right seats, right? If you want to market to your customer effectively, you don't want them spread across all these different functions. So that distinction is really important.
Well, and when you think about like employees, right? Marketing is here to make money, right? To bring revenue in. Who focuses on the employees then, right? Like having happy employees and having employees that understand the direction of your company and the goals of your company and why you're doing things and big announcements. Without that, like, how do you run a business, right? So again, it just goes to, there are all of these things that comms is focused on besides marketing. Of course, that is a big piece of what comms does, but it feels like we're just sticking our head in the sand and forgetting about all of these super important things. Plus, when we look at comms as a marketing function, it often gets minimized only to, comms is PR, and therefore they're budgeted like PR and not like a comms team that does all of these things internally and externally. So
well, I want to switch gears a little bit because in getting to know you ahead of this podcast recording, I was really impressed by your advocacy for neurodivergence in the workplace, your own journey. I would love to talk about that as well. Can you share a bit more about your story there and, what you've experienced?
for sure, my favorite topic. And it seems appropriate to start by defining what neurodiversity actually is in case people are listening and aren't sure.
Yeah,
So
please.
neurodiversity refers to the natural variation in individual brain function, thinking styles, behavioral traits regarded as a part of the normal variation of the human population. So the word neurodivergent refers to people who have ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, plenty of other things that are not listed. And they've all been traditionally viewed as disorders like attention deficit disorder, autism spectrum disorder. But the neurodiversity movement advocates for a shift in thinking that celebrates neurological differences and recognizes that there are strengths that come with this sort of diversity. I am neurodivergent, as is 15 to 20% of the general population. And I like to put this in context. That's twice the number of people that are left-handed, and that's 20 times the number of people who have red hair. So that's a lot of people. And it's why I'm passionate about talking about this and shining a light on neurodiversity. And rather than having this notion of disorders that people are ashamed to have, we should just view them as natural differences, because just like a minority of people are left-handed, it doesn't mean that they're disordered. It just means they have to figure out how to be left-handed in a right-handed person's world, which isn't always easy. And I think about neurodiversity like that too, because there are plenty of difficulties that come with being neurodivergent, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're trying to live by neurotypical standards, or by, the majority standards in a neurotypical world. So we let left-handed people use left-handed scissors. So why don't we help neurodivergent people by kind of letting them and their brains work the way they need to? Which brings me full circle to my own neurodiversity journey, which I mentioned I have ADHD. My son has dyslexia and ADHD. And for both of us, it is this ongoing journey of discovery that never ends. How do our brains work? How do we fit into society, to our classrooms, to our jobs in a way that feels authentic to us, while also having to meet the expectations and the norms of the people around us? So I didn't find out I had ADHD until I was in my 20s. And I spent, the last 15 years learning how my brain works and figuring out how do I work with my ADHD traits rather than against them, trying not to be the same as everyone else and recognizing that my brain doesn't work like everybody else's. So I shouldn't have the expectation for myself that I'm going to be like everybody else. And what I realized is that once I started to lean into my differences and embracing them, I thrived. I found that the strengths that I didn't realize that I had made me really good at my job, like made me excel in the areas that I wanted to excel in. And I started to find confidence in myself and felt more comfortable unmasking and acting like myself rather than trying to be what everyone else thought of as normal, and stop comparing myself and blah, 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 blah. Since I took most of my life to figure this out, I'm on a mission now to help other people realize this sooner, with hopefully less pain and strife than I experienced. Because, when I found out that my son had dyslexia, like my husband and I were both like, oh no. But why? Like, why should that be the reaction? Like, I want my son to be proud of who he is, not ashamed. I want parents to understand that with dyslexia comes these amazing gifts that I had no idea about before I had a dyslexic child. Yes, reading is harder. There are things about dyslexia that are truly gut-wrenching and difficult. But there are also ways to help those people. And once they get into a world where they can use their brains in the way they work, they literally think in 3D. Their brains do things that I wish I could do. There are spy agencies that hire exclusively for dyslexic people because they can think basically like game out future scenarios in ways that normal brains can't. And I think it's important that we make other people see that, because we're stigmatizing them as disordered and something that has to be fixed, when really it's about maybe society adjusting so that we're all just able to show up as we are. And if I can be the representation for other people that helps them feel more comfortable in their own skin, then I'm here for it. And I wish I had more role models in my career showing me that it was okay to be different and doing things in my way. I had a few advocates in my life who are the ones who made me feel okay about it. Not that they were neurodivergent, but they would say things like, let Becca do it her way, because when she does it her way, it's really, really good, right? And those are the kinds of things that kind of empowered me to be me, which is a good thing, because statistically, neurodivergent people suffer much higher rates of burnout, discrimination, hiring issues, unemployment, and it doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the way you framed it up as this is just another skill I have. It's different from how you approach it. Let me do it well, because now that I've figured out who I am, I can really succeed. And I think that is a really important for folks who aren't neurodivergent. That frame of mind is really important to, as you're entering the workplace, you're, collaborating with colleagues. I mean, so much of communications work is figuring out how other people take in information, right? I mean, where do you see that Venn diagram of understanding neurodivergence and the role of the communicator?
That's a really good question, actually. I think we're so early in our understanding about neurodiversity, that really the place that we're in right now is the awareness phase, right? If you think about it as like a marketing funnel, it's just
Sure.
getting people. So it's where communicators really shine, right? Is getting people to know, what is the problem? Why is this a problem? And I can spout off some statistics for you, but there's a lot of data that shows that having neurodiverse workforces have way better business outcomes. So if you even take out the, it's the right thing to do piece of it, and just look at it from a dollars and cents in business, it is, you make more money if you have diverse teams. That includes neurodiversity. Harvard Business Review had an article all the way back in 2017 that is literally called "Neurodiversity is a Competitive Advantage." And it talks about the advantages of hiring neurodivergent people. And it talks about how, 28% neuro-inclusive workforces have a 28% higher revenue, 30% greater profit margins, and double the net income compared to their competitors. Australia's Department of Human Services says neurodiverse teams are 30% more likely than those without are 30% more productive than those without neurodivergent teammates. And there's benefits, the list can go on and on. But my point is that if we're in this awareness phase, the communications piece of this right now is everything. Of course, action matters more than words, but people can't take action if they don't know why or what or care about it, right? And we're the ones who make people care about things. So yeah, I'm here to talk about it and find ways to support people. And also, you brought something up earlier, which is, and I don't know if you used the word flexibility, but you were getting to it, but like to create a conducive work environment for anybody, not just your neurodivergent employees, allow flexibility, respect the way that people want to work. So we're not just mandating, right? Our way is the right way
Mhm.
of doing something. Like if your process looks different than mine, who am I to say that mine is the right way? If I'm the boss of a team, I expect outcomes. I don't give a shit what it looks like as you're, getting to it. I just want to like, are we seeing the results that we want? Yes. Fabulous. I don't care when you do it. Work in the middle of the night, right? Like show up to
Yeah.
the meetings you need to, take a nap in the middle of the day. Like if that's how your process works, like I don't know. I feel strongly about this because until I had kids, I would stay up all night working. That was my MO is my best ideas. They still happen after midnight. I'm just more tired than I used to be. So if I'm not working at night, you are literally not getting the best of me. So if I'm up every day at 7 a.m. taking meetings, there's no way that I can stay up past midnight working. And that literally means that my job is not getting the best Becca. And they're paying me for me, right? So shouldn't I have the flexibility to work in that way so that I can bring my best self? It seems so simple, but it's not. And people don't have that flexibility. And so we are limiting our abilities to drive better outcomes because we're not giving people just kind of basic accommodations. And again, it's not just neurodivergent people, it's all people. Neurodiversity is all people's brains work differently, like not just dyslexic people or people with ADHD. Every single brain is different, which means everyone has a different style. And I think the idea that we mandate how everything happens is crazy. And the, return to work mandate is kind of what the biggest example of that right now. I think,
Yeah.
I did research actually with my company a couple of years ago about every neurodivergent person and people with disabilities generally finds working from home to be an absolute godsend. Doesn't mean every single day you have to work from home, but there are things that you can do much better in an environment where I am literally comfortable. I'm sitting with a weighted blanket on my lap. The light is right. The temperature is right. I've got my
Mhm.
dog here if I need a little cuddle because I had a, emotional breakdown. Or to my point earlier, like I also have a physical disability. And so I have days when my body is just freaking out. And when I used to have to
Mm.
go to the office, I would have to go hide for like hours at a time. I don't have to do that anymore, right? Like I can show up for calls, I can be off camera if I need to. Like that flexibility is life changing. And I just, people ask what accommodations you can make for neurodivergent people in the workplace. That's it. Flexibility. Have an open mind. Let their brains work the way that their brains work. And, simple.
Yeah. Well, and you read my mind. I was just going to ask about, the remote work of it all, right? Because we've kind of had over the last 4 years this push and pull of, I think a lot of folks, we all went remote, and then as things opened back up, right, we started to test the waters. Some companies are back to that mandating place, which has its pros and cons because there's the benefit of collaboration, but where do we draw the line where we don't lose that flexibility, which isn't the responsibility of the communicator necessarily, but certainly something that impacts all of us.
Yeah, and I think the answer is we don't know. We're like in this paradigm shift, right?
Yeah.
Where we're
Mhm.
like we're oscillating back and forth between what's right and what's right. And we're going to land somewhere in the middle. But we, the leaders of companies, the communicators, the whatever, we're not going to make the decision. Like we aren't the ones who are going to like what's going to decide it is people are going to choose to work for companies that suit their styles, right? This next generation, I love talking about Gen Z because they're so cool. I'm a millennial and I used to be the one that everybody like bagged on at work, right? But now millennials are old. I'm 40 and I'm a millennial. So Gen Z is really changing the game. And it's not like apathy or whatever people try to accuse them of being. It's that they're looking at older generations and like asking what the hell they're doing with their lives. We have the ability to do all of these things in such easier ways that we just don't, because we go with we've always done it this way, so we're just going to do it this way. And can you imagine being like growing up as a complete digital native and watching people like me like fuddling around with old tools when they can just like whip up AI and, blah, blah. They just have different ways of doing things that are more productive, and they don't need us to tell them how to do it, right? And I personally see a lot of benefit when you just, this goes back to flexibility, just let people be the way that they are and see what a boon that is to your teams or to your business or to your whatever. Like, it really does, when you allow these other perspectives and allow the space for them so that people feel very comfortable to say, hey, I have this idea, and it might be, it might sound off the wall or whatever, and maybe it is, but at least they're comfortable to do it. I think you end up in a much better place. And I can think of a bunch of examples just like even in my head of times where people feeling comfortable to speak up and have a differing opinion or to advocate for something in a different way has like changed the game or made something way better than it would have been if I had just said, well, this is how we've done it, so we're going to do it this way. And I think business leaders get too caught up in that. And that's the same for return to work, right? Well, we did it this way before, but we don't know. We don't know what it's going to look like. And I don't think that we have the right answer as far as the best way to collaborate remotely. I just think we haven't quite figured it out yet. And so we're going to wait for this next generation to dictate it to us.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an exciting time, right? I mean, paradigm shift is the exact right phrase to use. And yeah, I'm with you on Gen Z, the kind of empowerment that I'm seeing from the next
Yes.
generation is exciting. I too am a millennial, so when the side part and skinny jeans culture war broke out between
boy.
Gen Z and millennial, my feelings were hurt, but then I moved on pretty quickly because I saw that this is exciting, the way they know what they want and they can speak up for it, so I'm willing to put those stupid culture wars aside.
Totally. And I love this sense of individuality. I don't think
Yeah,
that we all have to be the same. I don't think that everyone, and I can't tell you how many times I had been told some variation of, oh, well, Becca, you're not quite buttoned up enough. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like, I'm
yeah.
so good at my job. What does it matter if like I say like too much, which I do. I realize that it's a crutch. It's just how I talk. Or, I don't dress fancy enough. I don't know. There were all these things in my life that I felt like were so inauthentic to me that people expected of me that were so arbitrary. And I don't think this next generation is like that. And I actually think that we talked about whether we think that people are starting to appreciate comms and what they bring. I do think organizations are starting to appreciate internal comms in a way that they haven't before. I
Oh
think
yeah.
that there's a real shift happening there. And I think that was spurred by the pandemic, that it was a combination of crisis, of remote work, of everything happening and the whole world seemingly burning down at the same time, that there needed to be a lot more dialogue with employees rather than a quarterly town hall, right? And I think
Yeah.
that has changed the expectations of employees too, of what they expect from their leadership. And so leaders who aren't doing it well, it's becoming obvious. And I think that that will become more important as we're figuring out, what does remote work look like? What does return to work look like? The internal comms people and employee engagement people generally are going to play an outsized role in the success of that.
Yeah. Can you think of any examples or like instances where it is being done really well from an internal comms perspective?
I have no idea. I mean, no. I mean, I since I've only been at the organizations that I've been at, I will say,
Sure.
in the last 5 companies that I've worked at, I started the internal comms function. So that says that it did not exist before I was there. And I
Yeah.
think that says a lot, right? Like it is not a priority for most companies. It's an afterthought. And for a lot of companies, it's, oh, well, the PR person can just do internal comms, right? And it's like, it is an entirely different game. It's not the
Yeah.
same audience. It's not the same strategies or tactics or goals. right? I just think that internal comms is so much more important than an afterthought, but continues to be in a lot of places. Although I do see a lot of job openings now for internal comms, and it really does give me hope that this is becoming something that people see as not a nice to have, but a must have, especially in kind of this modern workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about, I mentioned like I've really enjoyed following you on LinkedIn. I think you do a really nice job of building your own brand authentically. Going back to the fact that you started your career with the idea of I love brand. You've built an incredible personal brand. You are fun to follow on LinkedIn. So can you tell me a little bit about like your thought process there? Any tips for people who want to polish up their brand on LinkedIn?
That's really nice. I really started posting a lot over the past year and especially the past 6 months. And it's crazy to see, like I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and I think every person I talked to made some comment about LinkedIn, right? And about some post I did or whatever. So it made me realize that when you do put yourself out there, people are listening or reading or watching or whatever it is, right? And so I guess to answer your question, I believe firmly that authenticity begets authenticity. So if I am who I am, honest, and I show up with authenticity, other people show up in the same way for me. And I try to remind people of that. Like when you're building a brand, whether it's in person or online or whatever, there's nothing that resonates more with other people than kind of sharing your true self, your flaws, like being vulnerable and connecting with people in like a real human way. This goes back to the buttoned up comment, right? You don't have to be buttoned up all the time. Other people are more comfortable when they're around people who reflect them, right? So what actually got me talking more online and posting more and building this personal brand was the neurodiversity conversation. And it was because every time I would talk about it, I would have so many people reach out to me and tell me how much it mattered to them and how much seeing somebody being vulnerable and sharing their truth and their real feelings made them feel more comfortable with themselves. So I'm in the mindset of we all have experiences that kind of shape us and make us who we are, but other people relate to those, even if you don't know who they are. Even if we don't think that they matter, they might. And so just start talking, right? Talk about who you are. I talked about neurodiversity. I talked about infertility. I've talked about leadership struggles and all of these things people relate to in a way that's not just, hey, let me tell you about my company or let me tell you about this project that I worked on, right? It's more about, let me share a bit of who I am as a person. And then you get other people who want to share themselves as people. And that's what building a brand is. It's not a one-way thing, right? I see it very much as a two-way engagement with all of the people who may be following me.
Yeah.
You're a good example of that. I mean, we connected because of LinkedIn, right? And now we're having a real conversation. And I think there's a lot of that for me that has come out of this. It's actually the reason why I still, am so active on LinkedIn. I don't make any money, having a personal brand on there. I have a job that pays my bills, but I do get this out of it, which for me is super meaningful. So I've got twofold advice, I guess. One, be yourself, which is what I just ranted on about. Tell your stories, use your voice. Don't copy other people's voices or all of the use these tips to whatever. Authenticity and vulnerability are relatable. And if you're building a brand, connecting to people on an emotional level is what resonates. That's true for, that's brand strategy 101. So connect with people on an emotional level. And two, don't overthink it. My best posts come to me always when I'm driving or in the shower or falling asleep at night. So it's always when I don't have the ability to write something down. So I'll literally pick up my phone and write like a voice note that's like 2 sentences. And then the next day I'll go and like quickly turn it into a post. Or I'll be between calls and I'll have just had a observation on a phone call and I'll quickly jot it down and hit post. And those are always the posts that perform the best. The overthought, over-edited posts, they don't get nearly as good. If I make a video or spend time editing a photo, forget about it.
Yeah.
But these off the cuff thoughts that
Yep.
feel real, that don't feel as polished, those ring true to people and people engage with that. So that's my advice if you want to build your brand.
I love that. Well, Becca, one last question for you. We like to ask all of our guests, instead of what keeps you up at night, what scares you, what gets you up in the morning? What brings joy to your day?
Well, it's funny, as I mentioned, I'm not a morning person. So if it were up to me, I would sleep until 11 a.m. every day and go to bed at 2 a.m. So anything that gets me up in the morning is something that matters. For me, two things. Okay, my kids and my teams. And it sounds cheesy, but I spent years battling infertility to bring my insane monsters into this world. And now that they're 10 and 7, they bring me so much joy because I don't have hobbies. So whatever I do with them is what I consider my hobbies, right? And they,
Yeah.
I don't know, they bring all of that. But on the work front, it is my teams. And again, it sounds cheesy, but you can ask anybody who has worked with me or for me or are part of my teams, and they'd probably echo a similar sentiment. Like, I put a lot of mental and emotional labor into building strong teams that feel safe to bring their true selves because of my feelings about authenticity and trust, and how the kind of collaboration and teamwork that comes out of teams that feel safe to bring their whole selves, it's so much better than what you would get otherwise. So my passion for team building, I think, is what drags my tired butt out of bed every morning and makes my days worthwhile. Getting on the phone with my team and having those calls, and sometimes just venting in bitch sessions is therapy. And it is what makes my job feel to me also like my passion. And that sounds so cheesy, but I don't have hobbies. I have my kids and my work. I have a husband who I also love. I never mentioned him in this, but I should. But yeah, those are the things that get me up.
That sounds like a wonderful full life, Becca. I love that.
Thank you. It's chaotic, but it's fun.
But it's yours, right?
It's mine, and I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on, Becca. Thank you so much for your time today. This was a very energizing part of my day, and I appreciate you telling more about your story and being that voice for those who are trying to figure out what works well for them.
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out. I'd love to chat with people about any of these topics. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to PodCatalyst, the official podcast of IABC. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Have a suggestion for a future episode? Send us a note at catalyst@iabc.com. To discover all IABC has to offer, visit our website at iabc.com. Until next time.